All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome to today's webinar on solving the operational visibility challenge across multiple lines of business. My name is Mike Tomlinson. I'm the PR manager here at Rocana, and I will be your host today. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, this webinar will be recorded and made available on demand after we finish today, so be on the lookout for that link. And second, please don't be afraid to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can ask a question by entering it into the chat feature down at the bottom of your screen, and we will bring it up where possible during the presentation or at the end during our dedicated Q&A session. And at this point, I will go ahead and turn things over to David Menninger to get things started.
Thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone. As a firm, we've been researching the area of IT operations for 10 years, and we've seen a lot of changes in that time. Today, we'd like to share some of the research that we've done with you and discuss what modern IT operations looks like and how you can leverage operational visibility across lines of business, not just in IT. Here's a quick review of what we'll cover. First, we'll do a little bit of background and introductions, both to the participants and to Ventana Research and the research that we conduct. I'd like to share some observations about what we see as the requirements driving and shaping IT operations, including some case studies that highlight the value of operational visibility beyond just IT and into the lines of business. We'll also discuss and review the Ventana Research Awards process and our evaluation of Rocana in that process, and we'll conclude with some recommendations. I put my bio up here. I'm not going to read you this entire bio, but I like to have it for you to refer to later. I want you to understand my point of view and the biases that I bring to the table. We're all biased, and so as you listen to my point of view, you can understand and interpret what I have to say in light of my particular biases. I'll summarize my background as follows, though I've been in and around the data and analytics space for over 25 years. I've generally been working on the vendor side, bringing enterprise software products to market to help meet the needs of organizations to collect and process data in order to improve their business operations. I've spent the last few years with Ventana Research, and I cover this data and analytics market for Ventana. I'll talk about our research more in a minute, but let me introduce our other panelist, Eric Sammer. And Eric, why don't you introduce yourself and your biases?
Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Sammer. I'm the CTO, one of the co-founders here at Rocana. And like David, my background is primarily bring products to market. Specifically, my background is primarily in what some folks would call big data, parallel storage, query, and data management systems, database engines, file systems, things like that. Prior to Rocana, most of my recent work has been at Cloudera. I was an early employee there. I spent about 4 years at Cloudera bringing Hadoop-based systems to the enterprise market. So a lot of my perspective around IT operations, event management, log and metrics is really centered around and informed by the data management space, traditional data warehousing techniques, but at enormous scale, typically tens and hundreds of terabytes per day of new data coming into the system. We'll get more into that later.
Okay, so Eric and I are going to try and go back and forth during the conversation today. We want to make it a discussion. So as Mike said, if you have questions and you enter them in the chat box, perhaps we can weave them right into the discussion before we get to the dedicated Q&A. But let me start with some background on the research that we conduct. We do primary market research, surveying thousands of organizations on their use of technology to improve their business operations. And my most recently completed research study looks at a combination of the Internet of Things and what we call operational intelligence. In other words, how real-time data and analytics can enable this improvement in business processes. I'll refer to several of the findings from this research during our discussion today. By the way, this research is available for free with registration on our website, so if you want to download this and have it for reference later, you can do that as well. Let me start with a little bit of the demographics of the study. We had 200 qualified responses to the survey. Basically, we're looking for enterprise responses, not software vendors or students or Mickey Mouse or Elvis. The surveys, typically draw from North America, but this one was even more heavily North American based. I don't really know why. I have some speculation, but this was 86% of the respondents came from North America in this particular study. About 1/3 of the respondents were executive and management positions, and 2/3 were users. Slightly more than half were in IT positions, but that meant there was a good representation. Over 45%, I think it was 46 or 7% were from line of business as well. There's a good cross-section of company sizes. We measure both revenue and employee count as our designations of company size, and just over 60% were more than 500 million in revenue and had more than 1,000 employees. So, other 40% represented smaller organizations. In terms of industry breakdown, about 1/3 were in manufacturing, about 1/3 were in services industries, which in our classification includes retail, and the remaining 1/3 were split between financial services and public sector. So that's the background for this particular set of research I'll be looking at. In addition to our primary market research studies, we look at various technology sectors at the end of each year and evaluate vendors and products and applications of those technologies to highlight some that we think are the most innovative in their respective categories. And I just want to make it clear that none of this research and none of these awards processes are paid research or in any way influenced by the vendors. So let's start with what's driving the IT operations market. From my perspective, costs have declined significantly in several areas. The cost of connectivity to gather data has declined significantly, leading to many more connected devices. The cost of storing data has collected from those devices has declined significantly, meaning that we now have more data available to analyze. Couple that with the cost of declining computing means we can process and analyze much more information. The net result is our ability to derive value from data has increased significantly. Also, as our dependence on electronic systems has increased, the risks and the visibility of outages has increased. If you look at the Amazon S3 outage at the end of February, it was a news story. It was covered in mainstream non-tech media. I was doing a quick Google search before the webinar and saw that USA Today covered it, for instance. If your business generates online revenues, think of the costs that are associated with outages and think of the damage your brand could suffer in the event of an outage. With social media, as soon as there's an outage, it becomes very widely known. And not only that, after the fact, there's plenty of debate and criticism, roaming out there on the social media outlets as well. But let's not dwell only on the negative. With this ability to collect and analyze all this data, there's also tremendous opportunities to improve operational performance. And we can identify and improve the ways in which customer-facing systems operate, improving customer service and potentially preserving or even creating new revenue opportunities. And the visibility into these operational systems gives a more complete picture of customer behavior, which can be used in the process of targeting and servicing those customers. So these are some of the things I see, driving us forward in terms of IT operations. Eric, I suspect you probably have a few viewpoints on this as well.
Yeah, I think you covered the most critical ones. Anecdotally, we see a lot of customers and prospects really worried, quite frankly, about the former, the risk and the visibility problem there. I think that there's a lot of concern, not just around service outages, but around things like security, visibility, and visibility into the estate, and sort of what's happening within data assets within the estate or the enterprise. So I think that's really interesting. But all of this sort of the fancy data-oriented products, the product recommendations in the retail space, the digital customer experience management really speaks to that second point that you made around the opportunity to improve and sort of how operations impacts sort of top line revenue. So we definitely see quite a bit of this in the customers that we work with.
Great. But I want to point out that this process is not necessarily easy. My slide here is titled "Data Science Required for IT Ops is Hard." The point here is that if you want to maximize the value of this larger volume of information that we can collect, it's not as simple as just browsing the data. You might look for trends or outliers by browsing smaller amounts of data, but you can't really browse billions of rows of data. Well, you can, but it's not a very effective way to work with the data. So in order to find the interesting information, you really have to apply algorithms and data science to understand the relationships and meaning that might not be easily spotted in such large volumes of data. The problem is that most users don't know how to do this. Our research shows that only half of the organizations surveyed can users produce their own analyses. And when we look at the reasons why they can't produce their own analyses, 79% say they don't have enough skills, and more specifically, 66%, 2/3, say that they don't understand the mathematics involved. Now, I think this is changing, right? We're producing more people that are trained and skilled in the application of advanced analytics and data science to large volumes of data, but these are not the same types of analytics that traditional BI has been designed to deal with. This is not something you do in a spreadsheet just due to the volume of data that's involved. And when we look further and we look at the satisfaction of organizations, one of the things they highlight, in fact, the biggest reason for dissatisfaction is this lack of skilled resources. So we need to address this problem. Hopefully in your organizations, you recognize the value of having these types of skills. But the other way to solve this problem is to find solutions that package some of those analytics up for you and make those types of analyses available in the systems themselves. But data science is hard.
Yeah, I think this one is super important. We saw this while I was at Cloudera as well. That even organizations that have this talent, which admittedly is tricky to find and to retain, certainly expensive for organizations. But even where you find pockets of it, there is this interesting phenomenon that just organizationally, the requests that are made of IT are much more around, keep the website up, keep things operating fast, and the environment that's constructed around IT tends to be highly reactive. So even where organizations might have pockets of people who really understand the service metrics and sort of what's happening within an organization, you find that even those organizations are, those resources are being asked to spend their time sort of firefighting and reacting rather than thinking proactively about how to move the business forward. In a lot of ways, we still look at IT, as someone who's lived in the trenches there running data centers, we still look at IT as this, the fire brigade and less the consulting doctor who's going to sort of help you live a healthy life. And I think sort of there's technology challenges there's skill challenges, but there's also organizational challenges, where many customers, at least organizationally, find that they are more successful addressing these problems via tools and technology rather than process and procedure.
So what are some of the requirements for IT operational applications? And I don't mean this necessarily to be an exhaustive list, but key requirements. Scalability is clearly a key issue, right? We're dealing with large volumes of data, back to that earlier point about the declining costs that make it easy from a cost perspective to process more information. The technology needs to be able to easily deal with these large volumes of information, right? It's routine today to deal with very large volumes of data coming from these systems. And part of the reason the data is large is that it's being generated constantly. And the ability to process that streaming data and to do so continuously is important, because if data is being generated constantly, if you're not evaluating it constantly, you're missing an opportunity to improve your operations, right? If you're waiting till after the fact, if everything's done in hindsight, you are missing an opportunity to react to information in line as it occurs and potentially correct situations before the situation becomes worse. We just covered the point about advanced analytics, right? You need those capabilities both in terms of skills, but you need those capabilities in the platform that is managing and processing the data. So you have to have something that either makes data science accessible or incorporates data science directly into the platform. And the whole notion, these operational platform applications ought to be enterprise grade, meaning they ought to be reliable and adaptable to embed into mission critical processes, right? It'd be kind of silly if you've got mission critical activities going on and the tools you're using to manage those mission critical applications are not themselves, hardened and ready to operate in mission critical ways. Similarly, the notion of converting the observations that you make into operational actions is important. And so finding ways to embed and adapt these findings, if you will, into your operations is also an important characteristic.
And one of the things that we've heard on the scalability, because I think a lot of people throw around, scalable, horizontally scalable, and sort of big data without providing sort of, the metrics and numbers to it. We've really been working with customers to instrument absolutely everything within the data center and get insight into things that they normally have not had insight into, which only makes that data set larger. So it's very normal for some of our customers to be in the range of, like I said earlier, 10 to 100 terabytes a day of new data, and not just the ability to take it in, to process it, to apply algorithms to do things like detect anomalies and so on and so forth, and sort of sift out and find the interesting bits within that haystack. But to be able to do it in real time, there's no real value in finding out that the website was slow, 2 days ago. That's not actionable, to David's point. So being able to do that in real time, but also being able to keep it online and accessible. So when you detect something odd within the network, from a security perspective, you can go back in time and find out, well, when did this really start? So it's not just about taking it in. It's not just about processing it. It's not just about processing it quickly, but it's about being able to access all of it in perpetuity, sort of over all time. And so I think a lot of those challenges are particularly hard when you talk about doing that, again, with that enterprise readiness and scalability and the feature set around that. Things like access control become first-class problems, role-based access control, so on and so forth, when you start having things like purchase transactions and net flow events and DNS queries and all of these other kinds of things coming into a single system, a single repository.
So it looks like Mike has a question.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. We do have a question. So far we've talked a lot about data. In this context, though, is it all log data?
Maybe I'll take that. I mean, what we've seen is, and I think in a lot of cases, yes, there's for better or worse, we have tons of log data. There's tons of diagnostic information in there. There's tons of quote unquote business value in that data. But the question around what is a log becomes a little bit suspect when you start to think about things like HTTP events. So I would argue, you know, to some people, those are logs for IT. For certain people, looking for things like cross-site scripting attacks and SQL injection attacks, that's security data, security event data. For the marketing team, I would argue that that's user behavior data. That's, you know, David clicked on something to add it to a shopping cart, but didn't check out with that shopping cart. That's all the same data. So we, you know, while some of it is couched in terms of logs, we really think about these things as events. You know, and not just coarse-grained events like, you know, somebody checked out, but fine-grained events. Somebody browsed an item, somebody clicked on an item, you know, somebody started a TCP connection, somebody ended a TCP connection, those kinds of things. So it's logs, it's higher order, or what some application performance management people would call synthetic events. It's metric data, time series metrics, understanding the rate at which something happens or the timing information around something that happens. It's, you know, for us, the way we think about it is all of these things are events that are taking place in the data center. They have different levels of value to different communities within the organization, where those communities are ops, database ops, security, marketing, and all the various lines of business. So if you think about it from that perspective, I think it's much more than just, you know, quote unquote log management or quote unquote log search, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Mike, I'm going to answer that question actually with my next slide. So we actually looked at what were the sources of information that organizations are working with in the research. We asked, you know, which of the following sources of information for infrastructure systems are important to your organization. And obviously, from the responses, you can see that people could select more than one. And so, you know, IT systems, what you might consider, you know, traditional log information was certainly at the top of the list. But there were many other systems and data sources that were accessed in order to provide a complete picture of the operational performance of the organization, right? Everything from, you know, what you might consider traditional ERP applications all the way down to external financial market data, right? So there's a variety of set of systems that people are working with, some of which you would, you know, consider true IT sources, right? We've got log files and machine data right about in the middle of the screen. You've got messaging systems a little further down. But then you've got, you know, customer data sources and employee or workforce applications as well. So it's interesting that over half the organizations had at least 11 data sources, and 29% of the organizations had more than 20 sources that they were analyzing as part of their processing. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Eric.
Yeah, you know, and just anecdotally on top of this, we've worked with a couple of different customers in the telco space, for instance, and it's not uncommon for them to give us call detail records, which include like all of the cause codes around why calls were dropped and all that other kind of stuff. For them, that's like a golden data set, you know, it's a mission critical data set, along with the base station information and sort of the network data around operational metrics and really understanding customer experience as a combination of, you know, and through the correlation of those two data sets. In the retail space, obviously user transactions and user behavioral events are particularly interesting, again, combined with operational data. In the financial world, we've had customers actually give us fixed feeds of like market data and transactions. Like David said, it's sort of a special case, but it's interesting to see how operational events in high frequency trading systems actually affect the quality of trades that are being made. So there's lots of interesting correlation that can happen once you start to combine those data sources.
And we actually have
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. You have another question,
Yeah, I
Mike?
was going to say, yeah, we have one more question, and I think it's good to bring up right here. Given all these sources, who decides which events should be monitored?
Well, it's interesting. We actually did a little bit of research on that, and it turns out that IT execs and managers tend to be the ones who most often define events. So about 2/3 of the organizations we see IT executives and managers as the ones defining what information gets logged and tracked and monitored. Um, and they do a pretty good job, but it turns out that customers and partners also have good insight here. And while a smaller portion of organizations, it was less than 20%, actually had customers and partners involved in that process, those that did actually had higher satisfaction rates in the outcomes of their systems than those who did not. So I would encourage you to consider involving, people outside of the IT organization, specifically, the frontline facing folks in terms of customers and partners, to get their input, because they can provide additional insight that you might not have thought of on your own.
Yeah, and that's certainly been my experience as well, as somebody who's crawled around behind racks and been responsible for systems. Typically, there's a couple of things that come top down. You'll have like compliance people tell you like you need to track every login attempt, for instance, on the corporate network, and that stuff is pretty makes tons of sense. So you get those kinds of things. In the case of like a telco, like capturing CDR data, for instance, is of course you're doing that. And then I think that there's always this bottoms up approach, which is the IT staff doing whatever it is they need to do to keep the lights on. So if you're an Oracle DBA, that means capturing things like trace files and core dumps and database profiling information and access information. So I think that there's a combination of top down and bottom up. I think one thing we haven't really talked about on the requirement side here is having this kind of system be a shared resource throughout the organization that is self-serve to all of the different constituencies has actually proved, really critical, at least in my experience. David, I don't know what your take on this is, but being able to offer a system that can capture all of these different kinds of data, but knowing that a single team isn't going to be the one team that's going to onboard and integrate all of these different data sources winds up being really important. So having that be a platform, a service that's accessible within a large organization, a bank, a retailer, an insurance company, a telco, where the database ops team can decide, we'd love to capture every Oracle trace or something that happens here, at least while we go through Black Friday, for instance, and have them be able to start capturing that data, analyze it, and then decide to shut it off if they're not interested in it anymore. I think that level of agility is actually really critical for these kinds of systems being successful. You're not going to have, in my experience, one team that makes all of a major bank successful from the perspective of capturing and instrumenting the enterprise.
Yeah, I would agree. We see self-service as becoming common across multiple areas of technology. And I think the notion here is that if you go back to the premise that we're talking about operational visibility across lines of business, you're not going to get the value out of that if you're not delivering that information easily to those lines of business users. I see another question's come in. I'm going to bring that one up in the context of the next slide, since compliance is addressed there. There's a question about how would you embed regulatory compliance into this discussion? Well, when we asked participants in our research, what were the benefits of their deployments, and this chart here shows the top 5 benefits that were reported. Not surprisingly, security and fraud tops the list. Right? We've with the risk and the visibility of those types of problems, it's not surprising to see that at the top of the list. But the next one, identify opportunities for improvement, I think speaks more to business issues, or potentially it could also be referring to improving your systems. But since there was a separate item about optimizing IT processes and systems. I take this one to be more business oriented. And then we get to compliance, right? It's clearly one of the top benefits, the third most often reported benefit that we see. So clearly people are using these systems, as Eric noted, and as the question suggests, for compliance purposes. You've got a great body of information to observe non-compliant behavior as it's happening. You've got a great body of information to audit behavior, and you've got a great body of information to do forensic analysis if there should be some sort of a breach in compliance. So I think it's it's clearly a common use and benefit for IT operations platforms. I pointed out optimizing IT systems and processes already, and managing performance of the organization also rises near the top of the list. So it's a pretty healthy mix of both IT and business-oriented benefits that we see reported. And these are just the top 5, right? There were others in the list as well, and continued that mix of both IT and business-oriented benefits. Anything you want to add in here, Eric?
No, I mean, that's really consistent with what we've seen. Obviously, there's always the huge focus on security and fraud. But getting back to that question, compliance around data asset access policies, compliance around service utilization, including resource utilization around things like corporate networks. Anecdotally, again, we had a use case where we were doing a POC with a customer, and within the 1 week POC, as we're running, we all of a sudden see employees internally accessing shared drive services, things like Dropbox and Box and things like that, Google Drive, which are not approved for use within this particular customer. And so lots of eyebrows started getting raised. I think those kinds of insights are actually critical for compliance, especially when you start talking about publicly traded organizations and things like that.
So while we're on the subject of benefits, let's walk through a couple of use cases. The first use case we'll talk about is monitoring customer experience. So much of our interaction with customers today is based on digital interaction, right? You've got systems, and we do this to try and become more efficient, right? We put systems in place, electronic systems in place to handle self-service customer service types of activities. So you've got customers interacting directly with your digital technology, and if that experience is a bad experience, that's going to impact how they feel about your brand. Any type of extended outage for a large organization, quickly becomes a news event, like we talked about before. We've listed a few examples here on the screen. A couple of airlines have had very notable issues, literally not being able to operate for a couple of days in some cases. You see a banking organization mentioned here, right? Certainly would be upset if my bank, wasn't operating and I wasn't able to get to my funds if I needed them, for some particular purpose in a short time window. And retailers, right? We do so much business online with our various purchasing processes today that any significant outage affects the amount of revenue that you can produce because that portion of your sales channel is effectively shut down. But I don't think that outages are really the only issue you want to be aware of. You might have a system that's performing poorly, and that poor performance may not get noted in some IT operational applications, and that could be a real silent problem, right? The people are leaving your site, they're abandoning their carts, they're not completing their purchases, not because the system's down, but because it's not operating well. And so I think that's an important consideration. And when you look at IT ops, you want to think about how they can not only detect and identify outages, but detect and identify these poor performing situations so that you can create a very healthy customer experience for your customers. Anything from the field, Eric, you want to add in here?
I think, one of the things that we've seen is just with the amount of optionality that consumers have these days, especially in the retail space. We've seen this problem quite a bit, where if a page doesn't load fast enough on retailer A, most people will go over to retailer B and order the same product. So I think in a world where people have that kind of optionality, or where service is effectively what you're selling, again, telco providers are sort of a natural way to think about that. Quality of service and those kinds of things are the actual product that's being provided there. And customers, like at some level, will just stop complaining and just go over to a competitor. I've also seen this in the content provider space, where a single ad that was from a third party loading on a page caused an entire content provider page to not load due to the way some JavaScript was written. And as a result, effectively, the entire site was inaccessible because of this third-party ad. And it turned out that it was that way for about an hour or two. And so, on top of not, getting ad revenue, you're pushing consumers away from your product. And I think those are, at least today, people are pretty vocal about expressing their disinterest there, their dissatisfaction there.
So another use case I want to highlight is IT operations and efficiency. You probably all experience this in your organizations. The budgets are flat, but the expectations are increasing, and they're increasing significantly, right? We've talked about the increasing volumes of data you have to process. If IT budgets followed the volume of data you were processing, we'd all probably be in very good shape, but that's not the case. We typically have to do more with less, or maybe do a lot more with a slightly bigger budget. So we can use IT operations to help tackle that issue. If you think about some of the prior generation tools, they tended to be focused or siloed. And one of the things we can do is we can create a picture that is broader and combines those data sources, and allows us to look at data in a much broader way, so that we can identify some of those correlations between different classes of information. Obviously, the picture is always clearer if you can see how different things are related to one another. And if you're trying to plan for resource utilization and capacity, understanding what's happening in one system often has a directly correlated impact on another system, right? So your online purchasing activities will certainly have an impact on your supply chain and logistics types of activities. If you're, for instance, a consumer goods company, and you're trying to ship out to meet the demand of all those various orders that have been placed. So looking at this information, getting a holistic picture, and being able to use that information to improve your efficiency of your operations is clearly another use case for IT ops. The third use case we want to talk about is security and compliance. We've talked about this a little bit already. Just to drive the point home, you look at something like the Target breach. There were 70 million customers affected, and an estimate of $162 million of cost. This is going to happen, right? We've changed our philosophy. We as an industry have changed our philosophy from trying to prevent these things, completely from happening. We know that there are going to be attacks. 70% of companies were affected by a successful cyber attack. If you know that it's coming and you're aware that it's likely to happen, you can take the appropriate response as soon as you can detect that attack is going on. So it's unrealistic to think we're going to prevent them all. So be prepared to try to respond to the inevitable. And what that means is discovering things more quickly, right? The majority of breaches are not detected immediately. The median number of days to detect one of these types of events was 205, according to one study. So it's going to happen. Find it as soon as you can, and you'll be able to minimize the cost associated with that. And we've talked about the compliance aspect of this already. Eric, any other observations to offer here?
Yeah, I think just that the median number of days that people are sort of living within networks before they're detected. I mean, the hackers are getting smarter, and quite frankly, it doesn't take a whole lot of smarts to know that most corporations retain like certain kinds of data for 7 to 30 days, and if you just penetrate a network and then wait dormant for 31 days or something like that, it's relatively easy to move around undetected at that point. So or when you do get caught, they can't trace it back to the ingress point on the network. So just having that kind of visibility is going to enable people to catch things that historically have just gone unnoticed. We've seen this particular use case quite a bit with our customers, augmenting additional products that are in the market that have fantastic analytics, but don't do a great job of being able to capture and look at all of the data or retain and ask questions of all of the data. So I think that this one is top of mind for a lot of people. And I think we have a question on this one.
Yes, we do have a question. So how would a security team use Rocana Ops? Would it be in conjunction with existing security tools or in place of?
That's a great question. So I may have half answered that question already, but what we've seen again is that tons of great products in this space, right? And they tend to be very focused around things like deep packet inspection or end device device level management. So products like ExtraHop on the network side, Tanium on the device side. There's a fantastic swath of products out there. The challenge is being able to have the data that those products need in order to run sort of the fancy analysis and analytics on top of that. And some of them are optimized for being able to do sort of point in time analysis. Some of them are optimized to do analysis on a localized subset of data. But the reality is attacks rarely focus on, a single element. So typically what people do is they'll deploy Rocana Ops, they'll bring all of the data sources into Rocana Ops, retain all of that data, have Rocana Ops be kind of the data warehouse, if you will, the system of record for all of that data. They may then curate and feed streams using some of Rocana's functionality around stream processing and feed those streams to downstream systems where they may detect certain kinds of attacks, but then the research and the forensic analysis tends to be back in Rocana where they have access to absolutely everything that's happening across systems and access to the original data. So that's typically how we see people deploy Rocana alongside existing tools and solutions. Although in certain cases there may be overlap where Rocana can take on some of those use cases, while in other cases, vendors may have specialized analytics in a specific area where, Rocana can be useful in the forensic analysis side, but maybe not on the initial detection side.
And that's probably a good transition to my next slide, which is about tools specifically and what types of tools the research shows deliver the best results. It turns out that people tend to try to build some things from scratch or use some of their existing off-the-shelf tools, and they get reasonable results with that. What we're showing here in the chart are the satisfaction levels reported by people using these different categories of tools. So if you can find and identify a specialized tool fit for purpose, the users report higher levels of satisfaction. And I think that's pretty significant. If you look at the difference between the top and the bottom, 80% satisfaction rate versus a 50% satisfaction rate is a pretty significant difference. Those tools can be used in combination with existing tools, and existing tools are not a bad start. But if you want to maximize the benefit you're getting out of your IT ops, finding a specialized tool is going to be the best solution. Now, don't interpret this to mean that you're not going to customize your solution, right? There will generally be some amount of customization in any solution that you put into place, but building from scratch is not really the best way to leverage that valuable IT budget we were talking about earlier. You're constrained. Start with a specialized tool and then do the customization portions to make it more specifically adapted to your organization. The next comment I'd like to make about platform is that the research shows that organizations are not really progressing, I think, the way that they should. And by that, I mean specifically that they're not looking at automation as much as they ought to be. We talked about the volumes of information that people are dealing with, and to create manual processes around those large volumes of information just doesn't make a lot of sense. You really need to get alerts and actions embedded into your operational processes and have systems that allow you to do that. But the research shows that less than 4 in 10 are doing this. It's not till we get down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the sixth item in the list here, when we talk about what people are doing with their systems, that we get to even automatically assigning thresholds. Never mind taking an automated outcome, and then a couple further down on the list, just slightly behind that percentage-wise, at 38%, you've got folks linking the events to actual automated outcomes. So. To do that requires data science, and you see that even further down in the list. Only 29% are modeling the event patterns and applying machine learning. So when you think about this process, when you're evaluating platforms, think about this part of the process too, because this is really critical to be able to deal with these volumes of information that we're talking about.
This is something we spent quite a bit of time on. I think internally we started with, and there was a great bit of research done. I forget the firm that did it, that said that there's a couple of stages of adoption of this kind of tooling. Step 1 is to collect all of the data. Step 2 is to be able to ask sort of basic questions and do simple statistical analysis. Step 3 is to really get deeper insight into what's going on there. And step 4 is sort of the magical, fully automated business. And I think we understand that, not everything can be automated, but at the same time, there's definitely a spectrum here. And so a lot of our customers, with our first version of Rocana Ops, we really focused on steps 1 and 2. We eventually found that, now that we had built this platform that was seeing absolutely every event that was occurring in the enterprise, the obvious next step was to be able to take action on that. So we built sort of first-class functionality for the ability to find and detect complex events and combinations of events in real time, and then be able to make API calls and sort of orchestrate various actions throughout the enterprise in response to what we were seeing in that stream. Turns out, like David said, there's tons of opportunity for this, and the use cases around this really open up IT's time to focus on far more critical issues and to use that time more wisely and those resources more wisely.
So I see that a question came in, but I'm going to suggest we get to the next slide. So we're almost at the Q&A session. So how about if we move along, and we'll come back to that question in a moment. At the end of 2016, we went through our Technology Innovation Awards process, and we selected Rocana Ops as a winner in the Technology Innovation category for IT analytics. We look at both vendors, and we do Technology Innovation Awards there, and we look at at business use of those technologies, and we do awards on that side as well. We found that Rocana represents a shift in thinking. from monitoring what's considered important or essential to monitoring everything. A fundamental change in the way IT ops operates. And the market has evolved from point applications to organizations trying to build custom applications to capture all this data. But as our research shows, those specialized applications that can replace or obviate the need for those custom applications generally produce better results. And as a natural process, you see this in lots of technology markets. At first, organizations build custom applications, and as the market matures, the technology becomes less differentiated, the core technology, and what becomes differentiated are the applications that take that technology and apply it to specific business problems. And we saw in the Rocana Ops platform, a modern open standards-based architecture using some of the same technologies that you might do if you're trying to do this yourself, really delivering a new level of scalability and allowing more history to be involved in the analyses that are performed, and really hitting on that key attribute we were talking about a moment ago of automation, right, including machine learning capabilities. So those are the attributes that caused us to single out Rocana Ops as something noteworthy and worthy of highlighting in our innovation awards at the end of 2016. So in terms of next steps, and then we'll get to Q&A, I recommend you start with use cases. And really, it doesn't matter what technology topic we're talking about, right? You need to be understanding what is the change you want to make in your organization. How do you want to improve your organization? That will create the focus you need in order to understand what your particular requirements are, right? And one of your requirements, presumably, if you're listening to this discussion, is that maybe you're not capturing all the data today, or maybe you're having difficulty capturing all the data. And so understand your requirements and understand if this larger view might be helpful to your organization. Think about the points we made about specialized tools, right? Specialized tools can make it easier to get your job done, and make sure that those specialized tools can automate parts of this process, because you can't, we've all heard about, well, I think we've all heard about alert fatigue, right? If you don't automate this process, you're going to have red lights flashing and alerts coming in, and the majority of those alerts being ignored. So these are some of the things that I suggest you consider as you start down this path. Eric, what have you seen out in the field?
I think that's absolutely the case. I think the one thing I would add here is, there's always a temptation to sort of boil the ocean with these kinds of projects. I think, lots of customers come to us and they really struggle to figure out, how do you get the entire bank or the entire retailer, the entire telco on board with capturing all of this data and sort of coalescing around a solution for this magnitude of problem. And I think it is a challenge. I would say, to David's point, start with some specific use cases that are really challenging for the business, focus on getting those solved, prove out any solution, at scale that has all of the attributes that you need, the protection around data, the retention, the ability to handle, sort of large streams of data in real time, the support for automation and machine learning. And then sort of incrementally look to the next set of use cases and so on and so forth. I think it's a journey. It's certainly not something that happens overnight for a lot of people.
All right, Mike, over to you for any questions that have come in.
Sure. So here's one question. What type of architectural challenges have you or Rocana Ops customers faced when implementing log or data collecting, for example, in data centers? Thinking about a use case where tens of thousands of servers, routers, et cetera, are connected, does extensive usage of Rocana Ops need, for example, a separate network architecture?
Yeah, this one sort of, this is a great question. Down at the architectural level, I mean, there are certain challenges that, start to come up when you start thinking about collecting this magnitude of data. And so one of the things that our customers tend to be incredibly sensitive to is, like, what's the overhead of a system like this? What are the resources that are required? And some think about it in terms of, for every business transaction processed, how much, quote unquote, monitoring do I need? And so customers tend to be extremely sensitive to that. What we found is that, and it's different for different parts of the system. No, there's no specialized networks and things like that. I feel like if I were the customer, that would be a non-starter for me. If you said like, we could do all of this for you, but, step one, double the size of your, or the size or the capacity of your network, that kind of feels like a non-starter. So I think you need to fit within the existing infrastructure. What we found is that in most deployments, most customers will have 3 or 4 agents and systems collecting the exact same data, but siloing it into different applications or systems. And so by deploying a single system that collects everything, and then distributing the pieces of that out to other systems that are interested in it, as well as offering that single repository, turns out it can wind up being more efficient. Even though in theory you're collecting, a whole lot more data, you're only collecting it once. And so eliminating all of that duplication of effort in terms of resources, network bandwidth, agents being deployed, all these other kinds of things. Turns out that actually can wind up being more efficient in the end. On the other hand, there is just the case where, like, if you've never collected all of the net flow data and all of the log data, like, yes, there's certainly a lot of data there. We've never seen a case where it's been challenging for the organization to think about that in terms of like total volume. There are cases where people have, and again, I go back to telcos because they're one of the more complex, where you have many small regional facilities that contain operational data that may have like a small deployment of Rocana that handles everything locally and then forwards the quote unquote critical stuff back to a shared version of Rocana that aggregates all of the critical events from all of the remote facilities. So we've seen this with things like brick and mortar stores, where retailers may have tens of thousands of stores, and then regional or global facilities that collect like a subset of that information, and where they choose not to forward everything because of things like network bandwidth concerns and things like that. But generally speaking, it requires some thought, but I wouldn't say it requires heroic efforts to be able to architect a system for collecting, capturing this kind of data.
Excellent. Well, I know we've been answering some questions throughout the presentation as well. So in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and wrap things up now. I do want to thank our panelists, David Menninger and Eric Sammer, and of course, thank you everyone for attending this webinar, Solving the Operational Visibility Challenge Across Multiple Lines of Business. If you do have any other questions, you can always contact us at info@rocana.com. You can learn more about Rocana by visiting our website, rocana.com. Stay up to date on the latest through our blog, and make sure you're following us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and we can keep the conversation going as well. So again, on behalf of Rocana and our presenters, I want to thank you all for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.